Good day, and thank you for joining Black Agenda Report. I'm Margaret Kimberly. Remember to like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and read blackagendareport.com. Our guest is Kshama Sawant. She's best known as a former Seattle, Washington City Council member whose platform was raising the minimum wage, and she was a driving force in doing that to one of the highest in the country. And she's now running for Congress in the 9th District of Washington against incumbent Adam Smith. She's running as a socialist candidate, and the primary election is August 4th. She joins us from Seattle to talk about her campaign. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Margaret.
I know you have a different primary. Generally, here in New York, we have closed primaries. Political parties have a primary, and the winner it becomes the nominee for that party. But yours is different. Tell us how it is different and what that means for your campaign.
Yes, as you correctly said, Margaret, we have what we call a jungle primary here, which means it's different than the closed primaries for parties. So in New York State, you have separate primaries for the Democratic Party and for the Republican Party. And if you're running as an independent, for example, as Andre Easton is running as an independent socialist, against Richie Torres and a genocidal Democrat, Richie Torres, he didn't run in the Democratic primary election. He's going straight to the November election. In Washington State, we have a jungle primary, meaning regardless of party affiliation, you all run in the same primary, and the top two vote getters, regardless of party affiliation, are the ones who get into the November election. And that's why I'm running in the same primary as Democratic incumbent Adam Smith, who is a genocidal Democrat who's been in Congress for 29 years, which incidentally, Margaret, is longer than many of my campaign volunteers have been alive. You know, he's one of the 5 remaining House Democrats who also voted for the war on Iraq. He voted to create and fund ICE. So this guy is a general among the warmongers, and that's why this election is so pivotal. Sorry, you're on mute.
Okay, there I am. You're running as a socialist, and the word socialist is, dare I say, popular now, but it is misused both by people who claim to be socialists and those who are anti-socialist, those on the right. It's become, frankly, used as a smear. Anyone who is disliked by the corporate media or by the duopoly parties is called a socialist, and that's supposed to make that person unacceptable as a political choice. And then there are people who are leftish, I guess. They may be liberal reformers and call themselves socialists. What does it mean to be a socialist?
Yes, as you said correctly, Margaret, there's a lot of people who call themselves socialists, and there's also fear mongering about socialism, whatever that might mean for anybody. That word socialism by the right wing, there's fear mongering around it, but we are in a decisively different period than, say, when the baby boom generation was coming of age in the 1950s and so on, where there was the specter of the Soviet Union, and there was a lot of fear mongering and vilifying of the ideas of socialism, and there was genuinely that mood of sort of anti-socialist ideas among the working class. We are in a decisively, dramatically different period now in American society, where socialism is no longer the dirty word as well as ordinary people are concerned, especially young working people are concerned. Really, if anything, capitalism is the dirty word in the sense that the vast majority of people, regardless of what words they use and what ideological ideas they, in any specific ideas they subscribe to, I think it's safe to say that tens of millions of American working people, young people, are disgusted by the status quo, by what's happening right now, which is war after war, the genocide in Gaza, an unprecedented cost of living crisis, so bad that in the richest country in the history of humanity, you have half of American households saying they can't afford groceries. So I think that is why the ruling class, the capitalist class, the billionaires, multimillionaires, and their political spokespeople are on the defensive, because their system is being recognized as a rotten system. And for me, socialism means I'm a revolutionary socialist. I'm a Marxist. In other words, the starting point is the capitalist system itself, which is a system that is meant to consolidate more and more wealth in the hands of the richest of the rich at the top, at the expense of billions of people on the planet. Capitalism is the international system. It's not just in the US, obviously. And so that means that when we all go to work every day, we get our wages. The wages represent a very, very small fraction of the wealth we all generate as workers, and the vast majority of that wealth is siphoned off to the top. And that's why you have this ridiculous situation where today the top 1% of America owns $55 trillion or so in wealth. I mean, it's just staggering. You can't even imagine, like, even $1 trillion, let alone 50 trillion. And so that is the status quo under capitalism. And that is why I am a revolutionary socialist, meaning I don't believe that the problems that plague humanity can be solved on the basis of capitalism, because that is the nature of capitalism. And that is why we have to overthrow the capitalist system itself. And in my view, what we need is a socialist world. And what that means at the basic level is the top corporations that are all in the hands of a few billionaires and multimillionaires, those have to be taken into democratic public ownership of the working class as a whole, and democratically run in the interest of humanity and the planet. Because quite frankly, war, genocide, and climate catastrophe, these are the most urgent crises facing humanity, which cannot be solved on the basis of capitalism, for the simple reason that these are all problems created by capitalism, by a class divided society. And that is why we need a society that is owned by ordinary people as a whole, for the simple reason that you cannot control what you don't own. In other words, just to give a concrete example, the vast majority of people today are against the genocide in Gaza. They are against the Israeli state. They are against the forever wars, imperialist wars. But we are not able to end those wars because we don't own the system, the apparatus that controls all of that, which is why we're also running against Adam Smith, who is a general among the warmongers. He is one of the people who has funded the genocide. He's continuing to fund the genocide. That is why my campaign is calling for an end to all military aid to Israel and for a permanent arms embargo to Israel. But just to finish that point, because the capitalist system, that the status quo is that they have all the power, we have to change the balance of power in order to win any of these demands. And for that, we will absolutely need militant mass movements.
There's some disagreement, as you well know, among socialists about the benefits of an electoral system. There are some people, some socialists, who say the electoral politics will not further the drive towards a socialist society. Obviously, you don't agree. Talk to us about the benefits and the pitfalls of electoral politics.
Yes, I think our starting point, in my view, has to be not so much electoral versus other points, because I think that is often a misleading and even a false dichotomy, electoralism versus movements. I mean, it's understandable that working people, and that was my starting point too, working people are disgusted by electoral politics, and how could they not be? I mean, it would be worrisome to me if you weren't disgusted, because what's on offer is the Democratic and Republican parties, where even in the Democratic Party, as the more you've seen the number of so-called progressive Democrats increase, in that same era, we have seen the Democratic Party launch a genocide, the funding of the genocide. It happened under Biden. Let's not forget that. At the same era, you have seen the railroad workers' strike being broken, and the gatekeeping against any form of public health care or even a strong public option. The fact that the minimum wage nationally is still $7.25. Contrast that to what we have done in Seattle through my revolutionary city council office, which is Seattle now has the highest minimum wage in the nation at $21.30 an hour. And so, yes, it's totally understandable that working people and young people feel disgusted. But the starting point for us has to be, what are the avenues through which we can win the biggest breakthroughs possible for the working class? And right now, we are in a tragic situation, Margaret, in America, on the American left, where for the most part, there is no leadership on offer. So there's a big chasm between the anger of millions of working people and the leadership that's on offer. sorely lacking. And one aspect of that lacking leadership is the fact that the overwhelming majority of the labor union leadership is business unionist, meaning they have made peace with the capitalist system, which also means that they have made peace with the parties of the bosses, namely the Democratic and Republican parties, which are both together the most powerful parties of global capitalism. And so the breakthroughs that we need, of the scale that we need, just to put a fine point on the scale, I mean, we want to win universal public health care. We want to actually address the cost of living crisis. We need to end the genocide in Gaza. We need Palestinian liberation. That is one of the most urgent things, if not the most urgent, because right now the genocide is expanding to the West Bank. I mean, the settlements are absolutely brutal and violent. And so we need an urgent end to all military aid to the Israeli state and a permanent arms embargo. But the question is, how do we win those things? And so for me, the question is not, should we run an election? That's never the approach that we use in my revolutionary organization. The starting point always is, what are the avenues that are available for the working class to make the biggest breakthroughs possible? And right now we are facing massive obstacles in terms of militant mass movements being the labor lead, as I said, the business unionist labor leadership. And that is why we fight for elections, because that allows us a platform of social struggle. Just to give you a concrete example, we made Seattle the city with the nation's highest minimum wage, not because of the labor leadership, for the most part. I mean, there were some labor leaders who were on our side, but for the most part, when I was calling for $15 an hour as the flagship demand of my city council campaign in 2013, at that time, most of the labor leadership was opposed to calling that demand. The only reason there was momentum around $15 an hour at that time and making Seattle the first major city to win it was because I won my election, and then how I used my elected office. And so that's the main question. What kind of representatives do our movements need is the most crucial question. And so when I took office, I could easily have taken the cozy, safe route of becoming a careerist, making deals with the Democrats and not endangering my relationships with them and, making it all about my career and everything. But instead, I chose the hard route, which is to actually engage in, use my office to build mass movements, put pressure on the labor leadership to support our 15 Now campaign, which I launched after I took office, and then winning the $15 minimum wage despite the opposition by the Democratic Party and by business representatives. So using elected office in that fighting manner is what got us the goods. And so it's not, so I never frame questions as electoral versus otherwise. It's a question of what is the kind of leadership we need in every frame, whether it's electoral or labor leadership and so on. So we can't disengage the two things. And just to give you another example of why not making that false dichotomy is crucial is because right now my opponent, Adam Smith, who is a genocidal Democrat, who's also a neoliberal Democrat, he voted for the deregulation of the banks, big banks, and then he voted repeatedly to bail out the big banks in the wake of the Great Recession, leaving ordinary people in the lurch. He voted to slash hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicare and Medicaid. He voted to break the railroad worker strike, as did virtually every Democrat. And he has voted to create and fund ICE. He's actually the co-author of all these war funding bills that are giving money to Trump's wars. And what have the labor leadership done? The leadership of the Washington State Labor Council, the leadership of the National Education Association, the leadership of the IFPTE, which is the parent union of Boeing engineers, the leadership of Washington Federation of State Employees, which is the largest public sector union in Washington State. The leaderships of all these labor organizations have shamefully endorsed Adam Smith. That is a concrete example of how the key question is not which dimension we are fighting on. The key question is what kind of leadership is on offer. And the last example I'll give on this, and there are many examples, of course, is California. In California, you have a Democratic governor and a supermajority or near supermajority of Democrats in the state legislature. And what you've seen is that the labor leadership has put its faith in the Democratic Party, and consequently, we have had, the Medicare for All version of the statewide CalCare. CalCare has been crushed by the Democratic Party 4 times in the last 10 years. And as Cal Matters, a local newspaper, noted, is that not even the threat of losing labor endorsement stopped the Democrats from crushing CalCare. And the simple reason is that they don't feel the threat from the labor leadership, because the labor leadership is in lockstep with the Democratic Party. And in fact, they went one step further. They endorsed a hedge fund billionaire, Tom Steyer, for God's sake, as their nominee. And of course, he lost. But the point being that if you make a distinction between electoral versus otherwise, you miss the big picture here, that billionaires are able to carry out their assault on working people's living standards and keep the door closed on the major victories that we need to win, like universal public health care and so on, and ending the genocide, by making sure that the only political options, electoral options, are Democrats and Republicans, and we are straitjacketed between the two, and then we are simply unable to break out of it. That is why running independent fighting campaigns like mine, and then using the office in the way I use, as a fighting organism, not to make deals with the Democrats, that's crucial. That's also the lesson from how Canada won its healthcare. The way Canada won its healthcare, public healthcare, was by the starting point was militant labor movements, mass movements, then launching their own candidates, their own party of the working class, winning elections in the Saskatchewan province, and then winning public healthcare in that province, and then that becoming so popular that the ruling class parties were forced to pass it Canada-wide, nationwide, because they were so afraid this new party for the working class would come to power. So that shows the sort of the process through which we have to fight for militant leadership at every level.
So the problem is capitalism itself, and that the Democratic Party is also a capitalist party. Now, they understand that, it's really insidious. Democratic Party voters are far to the left of their leadership. But we have this system that I think it frightens people. People are afraid to take a chance outside of the duopoly and knowingly and vote for a party that, I'm talking about the Democrats, who constantly lie to them. You've mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned that railroad worker strike that Biden broke with the help of Democrats in Congress. And yet he marketed himself as being the most pro-union president of all time. It was really sickening to me. And even when people know these things, they are afraid. They are afraid to take that chance to vote outside of the duopoly, and especially with Trump now. One of the worst things, there's so many bad things about Trump, but people are using him to make the case. And people are blamed for Trump, not the people who raised $1 billion only to lose to Trump, but those voters who do not want to go along with the duopoly politics are told it's your fault that you didn't vote for Kamala Harris or some other horrible person. So it's terrible what they do. They misrepresent themselves and then use the concerns that voters have in order to continue this loyalty to them, which doesn't get us anywhere. And I think I rambled a bit, but what are your thoughts about what I said?
No, these are all very, very important points. And one of the most important points you said there, Margaret, is that the voters, or in other words, the majority of the working class in America, is well to the left of the politics that's on offer from the Democratic and Republican parties. And in fact, that's why it's more useful to look at the opinion polls, not just today, but even going back 10 or so years ago, even 20 years ago on many of these issues. If you look at opinion polls on specific subjects, not which party do you what's your ideology, do you identify as socialist, all that, but rather, do you agree that there should be public health care? Do you agree that the insurance and big pharma are exploitative? Do you agree that we need affordable rent? Do you agree that public schools should be funded? Do you agree that we all need jobs and that our economy is devastated in so many of our cities? So if you look at, should we have full funding for Medicare and Medicaid? Should we not have cuts to Medicare and Medicaid? So all these issues, actually, the majority of the working class has been well to the left of the Democratic and the Republican Party for a while, for a great long while. And now we are in an even more dramatically left-leaning voter base overall, where people are against the genocide in Gaza. And for the first time, this is one of the most remarkable and historic indicators of mass consciousness in America, which is that for the first time in the existence of the genocidal apartheid Israeli state, in the nearly 80 years that it has existed, and let's be clear, it's a creation of American capitalism and imperialism in the first place, that apartheid state, for the first time in that whole time, the majority of Americans are against what Israel is doing. There's anger at the settlements, at the genocide, at the apartheid state. So it's just incredible how much agreement there is on that. But then on the other side, what is the politics on offer? The Republican Party is openly pro-Israel and as a whole, but the Democratic Party also is openly pro-Israel. And if you look at the numbers, the votes, there were votes on giving tens of billions of dollars for the genocide in Gaza, and also the same bills banned United Nations food aid to Gaza at a time when there were reports of catastrophic levels of mass starvation in Gaza. And it wasn't just the Republicans who voted on it. 173 Democrats voted in favor of that bill, including a majority of those who identify as progressive Democrats are in the progressive caucus. And so that's the situation we are in. And the genocide started under Biden. Same thing with the railroad worker strike. Every Democrat in the House, except for Rashida Tlaib, voted to break the railroad worker strike, including my opponent, Adam Smith. And again, that happened under Biden. And so I would say that what we have is working class people who are very open to and also welcoming, actually, of independent politics. Look at the opinion polls. Trump has historically low approval rating, but so do the Democratic and Republican parties as a whole. And there was a recent New York Times Siena poll which showed that the majority of people, young people, are in favor of a third party. And there are other polls where overall majorities are in favor of third parties. And even many people who voted for Trump are absolutely angry because of the cost of living, the gas prices, and also the fact that, he campaigned as an anti-war president. He said he would stop the wars, and now he's doubling down on the wars and the genocide. And so most people are angry. And what the missing piece here is, what are the independent options on offer? And so you see this contradiction between how, if you look at the overall popularity of Congress, it is extremely unpopular. I saw a poll some time back where it said, it's less popular than cockroaches, and yet the incumbency rate is extremely high. How do you explain that contradiction? That contradiction can only be explained by noting that for the most part, these incumbents get elected by default. They get re-elected by default because there's no challenge to them. And that's why this race is really unique, because there's an actual challenge to Adam Smith, so much so that, I don't know if you noticed, Margaret, he voted against his own bill. He proposed a bill alongside the Republican in the House Armed Services Committee to give Trump $1 trillion new for war, and also to fuse the US and Israeli militaries. But he is so scared of our campaign that he voted no on his own bill. And obviously that's not enough. We need to actually proceed to the November election. So we need to fight for every vote possible here, which we are doing. But my point is that having a concrete challenge that is strong like ours, it's the strongest ever challenge to Adam Smith. We have a powerful campaign on the ground. We have, hundreds of volunteers campaigning every week. And we have the whole district is, festooned in our posters, and there's a real buzz about our campaign. That's what's scaring him. And another concrete example is my 4 election victories on the city council. I was on the city council for 10 years, and I ended my tenure losing no election. I won 4 elections, and one of those elections was against an attempted recall on me by Trump supporting billionaire landlords. And we were able to defeat every challenge. None of the elections was easy. It was always a fight, and that's important. I wear that as a badge of honor, because if your re-election is a cakewalk, then you're not fighting for the working class. If you're fighting for the working class and then winning for the working class, expect the re-elections to be difficult, because the billionaires and their political servants will come after you. And that's what happened. But we prevailed. Why? Because many people who identify as Democratic Party supporters voted for my election. So in other words, that's not a barrier. Consciousness is not a barrier. And even people who otherwise vote for Democrats in other races will be willing to vote for fighting independent candidates if they are on offer. That's what we have shown so far.
And as a member of Congress, how do you plan to be effective? Are there any socialists in Congress now?
I mean, there are people who call themselves democratic socialists, but they're all members of the Democratic Party. There's no, yeah.
So you would be the only independent socialist in Congress. How do you foresee being effective in that situation?
I think the way we used our elected office, and I say our because it's always been mass movement driven. It's not just me. And the way we used our office in Seattle for 10 years is, I think, a very, very good indication of how it can be done in Congress. Obviously, it is going to be orders of magnitude bigger. The scale of the fight will be bigger because this is Washington, D.C. It is the seat of power of the political representatives of global capitalism. So obviously, we take very seriously those challenges. But fundamentally, it is going to be the same as what we did in Seattle, which is that rather than trying to see this as sort of, this is where I differ from the people who believe in electoral politics, in the sense that you don't win victories for the working class after winning your own election by trying to sweet talk establishment politicians. They are not your colleagues. They are class enemies. And that clarity, the fact that, because I'm a revolutionary socialist, my clarity that when I went to City Hall on day one, my job was not to be collegial and get along with the Democrats and then try to make peace with them and then sell out the working class. That was absolutely not my job. It was the opposite of my job. My job was not to go and govern the capitalist system. My job was to disrupt business as usual and build movements using my office, using my platform, and then win historic victories for the working class. That is how we did it. And our experience, Margaret, was, we were always extremely open to any Democrat who was willing to fight, Democratic politician who was willing to fight alongside us. And there are many concrete examples when a couple of the Democrats, the most left-leaning ones, did join us in renter struggles and so on. But the honest truth is that those examples, while they exist, were not the norm of what happened in Seattle. The norm was the Democratic Party politicians fighting tooth and nail against the victories that we were fighting for, against the demands that we were fighting for, both, backdoor machinations against our movements and then also openly opposing our movements. So the norm of what we experienced was that the Democratic Party is not going to be on your side. Surprise, surprise, because they represent capitalism. And you will have to fight for things. And so that is the approach we have to take in Congress as well. And in fact, most working people agree that we have more than enough people who go along to get along. We don't need more team players on team genocide. We don't need more team players on team billionaire. What we need is a fighter in Congress. And what we showed in Seattle was that even with one elected office among every other person was a Democrat. I was the only socialist, independent. But with that one elected office, if you are willing to do what we did, which is not think that your job is to win backroom deals and sweet talk the Democrats and try to morally persuade them, but instead understand that this is class war. It's capitalism and it's class war. Working people didn't make it so. It is so. And our only choices are either we roll over and accept the attacks, the class warfare from the capitalist class, or we can go to class war back against the capitalist class. And that's the choice I made as a working class leader. And that meant that we can win historic victories. We have made Seattle the city with the nation's highest minimum wage at $21.30 an hour. We defeated Jeff Bezos repeatedly, and we won the Amazon tax. We defeated billionaire landlords, and we won unheard of renters' rights victories. In fact, the main corporate landlord lobbyist, he said after he retired that during my 10 years in City Hall, the corporate landlord simply could not win. Why? And he said it. Sometimes your political, class enemies give you the best compliments. He said it was because of Sawant's army. That's a quote from him. And he's dead right. The billionaire class doesn't fear me alone. What they do fear, though, is when you have an elected representative like me who is willing to build an army of working class people to go to war against the political establishment, which represents the capitalist class. And that is what we did again and again. And in fact, another quote from one of our political enemies is the Seattle Times, which represents the billionaires. They said that we would get credit for coming out of nowhere and commandeering the city's political agenda. And that editor even said that in process-loving Seattle, $15 an hour is happening at lightning speed because of my one office. And so that political strategy of using your office to build class struggle-based movements, that can be all the difference. So just to give you concretely, what would it be different if I were elected to Congress? Then the question of minimum wage and Medicare for all is a very good example, because while we have made Seattle the city with the nation's highest minimum wage, what is the minimum wage in the, what is the national minimum wage? It's $7.25 an hour. With all these progressives and self-described democratic socialists being elected, the minimum wage is still at a disgraceful $7.25 an hour. The Medicare for all bill has been formally brought forward 13 times to my count, probably more times in the last 20 years. And yet it has never been brought to an actual vote. And the reason is that the way the Democratic Party progressives function is that they may themselves support some things. I mean, I'm not a mind reader. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they actually do support Medicare for all and whatever. But what they are not willing to do is to actually bring, put a political price tag on the individual Democrats who are an obstacle to winning anything. And that is what we did in Seattle. It was not just a fighting movement in the numbers of people I mobilized, which of course was huge, but it was the character of the movement, where we called out individual politicians for what they might want to do, which is betray us on the $15 an hour. And so what we did at the end of the day, we went from having one vote for $15 an hour, mine, to winning a unanimous vote on 15 less than 6 months later. Why? Because we put a political price tag on each individual politician's political career. We made it so that if you voted against 15, your career would be damaged. That's the kind of movement you need to build in Congress as well. In other words, concretely bringing a bill for $25 an hour minimum wage, or ending all military aid to Israel, or free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich, one of the demands I'm fighting on, and actually bringing a bill forward, and then going around the nation, rallying masses of people and saying, demand from your Congress member, what are they going to do? Be in their faces and say, are you going to vote yes or no? That kind of political battle inside the Democratic Party needs to happen, which is not happening on the basis of the idea of the progressive Democrats.
And as we close, how can folks find out about your campaign?
So yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. No matter where you live in the nation and you're watching this, if you agree that we need a fight back, that it is a historic opportunity to defeat a warmonger like Adam Smith, because it's not just about Adam Smith, it's about defeating the war profiteering billionaires and multimillionaires as a whole. It will be an electrifying battle. If we are able to head into November, it will be an electrifying battle between a revolutionary, independent, anti-war socialist and a general among the warmongers. But to make that happen, we need to be one of the top two vote getters in the primary election. Ballots are already out. People are filling their ballots right now. If you're in Congressional District 9, which is in Washington State, which is my district, then please make sure you get your ballot from the mailbox, and then you fill out our name and then put it in one of the ballot boxes. If you're not in the district, but you can drive up to the district, please come. We need you to canvass alongside us, because it's a question of doing a force multiplier, meaning if you are volunteering, you'll end up talking to hundreds of people. So we can cover a lot of ground on that basis, and hundreds of people are been volunteering, as I said, every week. And also make sure that you go to kshamasawant.org, my first name, last name.org, which is our campaign website. Please donate and please get involved. Even if you are living in some far off part of the nation, you can still sign up for a phone banking shift. And that is also another crucial avenue through which we reach voters. This is the strongest ever challenge to Adam Smith. We have a real shot of defeating him. Please help us get into the November election.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Kshama.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It was a real pleasure.
And that's Kshama Sawant, running in the 9th Congressional District of Washington State as a congressional socialist candidate. Thank you.